really for the benefit of improved freight planning at the megaregion scale is really we all talked about how it really helps us to understand the economic relationships within each megaregion. Um, so I'm trying to go quick. For some of the needs, we, really it came down to funding. That was our big topic about, we need funding both at the federal and state level. Competitive grants, we talked about that, if the federal government did some competitive grant program to encourage this type of work, that would be very beneficial. Resources, really also was funding again, but also trying to encourage cooperation. And then one of our last topics that we really discussed was one, changing the name of megaregions to something that sounds less academic. Sorry, Catherine.
I don't take it personally.
We, talking about maybe multi-state cooperative corridor planning, that sort of thing. One of the things we noticed that, depending on the activity, different corridors would be different, had different strengths. Like, for example, like if you look at the megaregion map here in Atlanta, the freight network to going north to Chattanooga is very strong, but on the megaregion map, that connection to Chattanooga and going north is kind of limited. So different corridors have different opportunities.
In terms of the benefits, we're lucky to have a health expert on our in our group. So I think something that came up that maybe hadn't been discussed quite as much is the idea that safety and air quality are a couple of the benefits that can come down from this megaregion consideration. And really those are some of the benefits, not that economic considerations don't get down to the individual level, but these are really individual benefits to folks that might be in the area where this is occurring. As far as the needs, this is easily the most spirited part of our conversation for sure. Discussion of the need for obviously shared goals, including having public and private together at the table when discussing that. And I thought that an interesting point about sort of what is the forum that this type of agreement can occur in, and the challenge of developing that forum and coming up with ways to bring people together to the same table that aren't required to be there or might not otherwise do so. There was also a discussion of how do we inform elected officials and others of this type of planning, and there was the idea of using things like the Conference of Mayors, NARC, AMPO, Chambers of Commerce to sort of get out to folks to explain this concept to them and help push it forward. The need for the data loop, of course, using universities as partners to push this forward. And then we also discussed the potential, not only, of course, funding as it underlies everything, but the potential in this case of maybe identifying alternative sources of funding with private folks who may be interested or may see the benefit to their bottom line from doing this type of broader planning. And then a brief conversation about resources. There was an interesting discussion about data, purchasing data, the challenges of purchasing data, and an expanded modeling that is up from just the state and MPO and really tailored to the mega region conversation. So.
The benefits area of it, what we did talk about specifically had to do with obviously the benefit of consistent data across all the agencies and folks that are involved from the private and public sector, the need for making sure we got data available, and basically having that data, those good facts would then help us from a state, local, regional perspective identify projects that were probably multi-agency beneficial. We also talked a bit about how those data points, those data sets, those facts would help us also more strategically invest and also attack economic development. Let's see. Bruce mentioned VIUS. I have no clue what that is, but it is apparently a federal data set on vehicle information, so we'll go with that. That's supposedly coming back, but that was a reinforcement on the need for this warehousing or this pulling together of data. On the need side, it was mentioned we should look at better utilization of the capacity of our facilities. Obviously, that means if you avoid the peak hours of travel, for example. We talked about better understanding of the supply chain logistics between private sector and where freight is actually going and why it's going. And as obviously we talked yesterday or listened yesterday about parts users ordering parts from 3 places and only using one. So you've got 3 trips and 1 actual necessary trip. We talked about how to get the elected officials to have more buy-in to this concept of thinking regionally instead of locally, and talked about whether or not that should be a federally mandated program or a federally directed effort to tell you how to use the money. There are obviously from the states and local folks negative responses to that concept, but we did get into discussing the potential for incentivized programs from the federal government that encouraged partnerships. Let's see, we talked about interregional cooperation versus new mandated layers, and we talked about better understanding as we discuss it with politicians more than anything about the benefits of cross-regional projects versus, you know, again, the mentality I was elected to help my town, my city, my county, my state. And then we also talked about, to some degree, real quickly, about existing programs that are there in the federal government today, in FHWA specifically, that allow for some flexibility on how things are interpreted or how things are used. And I mentioned, for example, Corridors of the Future, the tolling pilots that allow you to enter into agreements on how to use the money you collect. And I don't remember the other one. Oh, ARA funds. I talked about that too, I think. That's it.
Great.
Group 4, we looked at the mutual economic benefit for both the public sector and the private sector. For the private sector, benefit for looking at things from the megaregional standpoint is cost containment to ease their friction. And for the public sector, it's improved prioritization of needs and more efficient spending. We had a spirited discussion about the difference between cooperation and competition, and that it's something that you got to negotiate. Our needs, data, and data, and data. We need cooperation, and maybe we need to set up a communication structure for us in the megaregions and perhaps around the megaregions. It would include both private sector and public sector participation. Because regardless of whether Birmingham's cooperating with Atlanta or competing with Atlanta, whatever either one does is going to affect the other one. So we really need to know about it. We need a harmonization of regulations to help, again, speed the velocity for our private sector partners. And we really need to define the roles throughout the federal, the state, the MPO, and even down to the local levels, and how we all fit in with the megaregions, and to figure out how we are indeed connected and recognize that connectivity that we all share. Our resources, the number one resource we thought was getting together, networking, you know, maybe doing webinars or something, through some communication structure we talked about. We thought it'd be a great idea for the folks who create the FAF to also create a methodology through which the FAF could be disaggregated down at least to the FAF zone level, perhaps down to the county level, using data that we could get somehow at a reasonable cost without going into severe budget limitations. We need a standardized set of performance measures, and we need to ask the private sector what measures are important for them, what is going to increase their velocity. As for actions, we thought it'd be a good idea to create an infrastructure warehouse, perhaps a warehouse of metadata. Where do you go to find the data? because there are a lot of data sets that you know about and you know about, but I don't know about. So a way to open that universe up, and so we can all be talking in the same language. We need to recognize the different needs and goals of the public and private sectors. I forget what this was, where we were going with this, but we need to advise MAP 21 so that we can speak a national freight language. Perhaps to create a consortium among the megaregion for the conversations. Again, that communication and connectivity structure. And the key element to doing all this is to identify champions. Who's going to say, hey, let's all get together for a conference call. Let's get together in Atlanta for a network. How do we do that? And so our prioritization of those is, again, data is the highest priority. We need to get buy-in from private sector and elected officials. We need to collaborate, be willing to collaborate, and be willing to pick up the phone call and call your peers. And we need to spread the word. Spread the word about megaregions, whatever we call them. Spread the word about the need to address these issues so that while we are competing for resources, we are providing the infrastructure so that resources get to where they need to go.
Thank you. On the phone calls and the forum, I think just an interesting example, a much smaller scale, is something that Federal Highways has organized quarterly for megaregions practitioners and researchers that Catherine and others have participated on. It's quarterly, but maybe there's a value in maybe ramping that up to cover the sort of thing that was covered in the last report out. Four excellent summaries. It's amazing what the groups were able to cover, considering the stingy time that we had available for it.
I wanted more.
Well, it's consensus and negotiation is what it comes down to.